Good morning, or good afternoon, I should say. My name is Linda Villadoniga, and I'm so happy to be presenting this webinar for you. I wish I could do this in person, but unfortunately, I am in the process of selling my home and buying a new one, and everything came to a head today. So I hope you enjoy this presentation. It is titled Using Art to Teach Social Injustice and Conscience. This is my first time presenting for Delaware, but I am thrilled to do so. This is the link for the handouts. In the handouts, you will see that I've made you a PDF copy of my PowerPoint presentation. I've also given you a PBL activity that you can do to incorporate not just art, but also literature into your social justice units. You can pause the presentation here and get the handouts now, although that's not necessary. You can get them later, but you might want to take a screenshot of this just in case. And then I'll see you on the flip side. Okay. I came up with this idea because teaching social injustice is relatively new, although it shouldn't be. And I think we as language teachers probably included it in our language teaching anyway, because of the different cultures that we deal with on a daily basis. I taught for about 40 years in a variety of locations and levels, and always there was some need to touch upon social justice in one way or another, whether it was the indigenous people of South America or Central America, or the fact that Equatorial Guinea belonged to Spain for a long time, as well as parts of Western Sahara. And you need to talk about those kinds of things. You have to talk about the Inquisition and all kinds of other topics. So for us language teachers, this is not something new. This is just a new approach. We will be talking about different artists and not writers, because I cut it short to just art, whose works reflect social justice, or who can spark some creativity in you as well as your students to put together a unit on social justice that incorporates their creativity and an outlet for them to express their feelings about social injustice, and maybe awaken their social consciousness. Sorry. I have found that students become totally engaged using project-based learning activities. They can be used as summative assessments, and they can also be used as formative assessments. The goals of this workshop or this webinar are to give you the tools you need to prepare a lesson using art and or literature to teach social injustice that you can teach to your students. And at the end of the presentation, I would like you or your classes, and I know we have a few weeks of school left and that there's lots to do, but sometimes when one part of your class is testing and another part isn't, this might be a good time to show them some works of art that reflect social justice, and have them create a piece. And I would love it if you could share those with me as attachments. Take a picture, send the attachment to me, so that I can use them with your permission in future presentations. Having said that, let's go. This is a quote from John Kennedy. We must never forget, art is not a form of propaganda, it is a form of truth. And you will see in the artists and art pieces of art that I have selected for this presentation that that is true, that social justice art, social justice reflected in art is a form of truth. It depicts what's going on in the world now. First artist we're going to talk about is Picasso. Picasso said, art is never chaste, art is dangerous. His anti-war feelings are especially reflected in two of his most famous paintings, Guernica, which is real famous, and the Charnel House, or Le Charnier, which is not so famous, but also depicts the atrocities of war. So the first one is Guernica, which we have all seen, I'm sure. It's done in black and white with a little bit of red. It depicts the atrocities that were committed against the Basque country in northern Spain when the Germans dropped bombs. Most of the people injured were women and children because the men had been sent to fight in the Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War took place starting in 1936. It was fought, it's called Civil War because it was brothers against brothers, families against families, citizens against citizens. There was the Republican faction and the Nationalist faction. The Republicans were loyal to the Spanish government. They were in opposition to the Nationalists. They were led by a military commander, General Francisco Franco, or as he became known as Generalissimo. The Nationalists did prevail, and but the bombing of Guernica proved to be a critical point in the conflict. Mostly civilians were killed, as I said, and mostly women and children. Picasso drew his inspiration for this art piece from newspapers. And so the town of Guernica was attacked by the German Condor Legion and also by the Italian Legionary Air Force. It was a bloody attack. It took place on Market Day, so it was sure to be full of people. And it was the first carpet bombing to be performed during the Spanish Civil War. This carpet bombing is a progressive and systematic attack on one location, and its purpose is to destroy it completely. The men were away at war. It is therefore not unusual to find that the people that you can see in the painting are women and children. It's done in grayscale, as I said, because it was an homage to the first newspaper stories that were hitting the racks at that time. It is a huge painting. If you haven't seen it, you really must at some point. It is remarkable to just stand there and look at it and feel what Picasso wanted us to feel, the total devastation of a city. There is a light bulb here that represents sort of light at the end of the tunnel. It is also depicted in this painting is a bull, which is symbolic of Spain, of course. And you can see bones and people lying. There's people lying under the bull, people lying. Here's a horse that's in the throes of death, and a woman. So this painting is one of the first paintings in the 20th century that reflected the ravages of war and the disasters that come with it. The next one is the Charnel House, or in French, Le Chanier. It is a painting also very symbolic of Picasso. It was painted in 1944, 1945. It's oil and charcoal. It's on a canvas. It's a canvas painting. It's supposed to deal with the Nazi German genocide during the Holocaust. You can see there's a table that's set here, and there are people huddled underneath it, which represents the Jews who were hiding from the Germans. He based this painting again on films and photographs of a slaughtered family. Ironically, the family that he used as the inspiration really was a family during the Spanish Civil War, but he used that as a jump-off point for his commentary on the Second World War. It's a jumble of figures, as you can see. You can see all kinds of people down here. Beneath the dining room table represents a murdered family. it's also supposed to represent the way that they found the bodies of those who were killed, the Jewish people who were killed in concentration camps, one body on top of the other. Picasso said that the work was a response to the first photographs that were taken in the concentration camps. The black and white palette reflects the war photographs that inspired the painting. He used oil and charcoal, as I said, and it measures 199 centimeters by 250 centimeters. So it's another fairly large painting. This is one style that your students might enjoy because it's very different and there is no right or wrong. You take pieces and put them wherever you would like to fit them. They can be done in black and white. They can be done in color. Many of Picasso's works are in color and they look disjointed, sort of. So students might enjoy doing something like this. Our next painter is Dalí, who is also a Spaniard, born in Catalonia. He is known for his extravagance and his images of melting clocks and all kinds of little things like that. He did flee Spain after the Spanish Civil War. He went to Italy for a while, and then he went back to Cadaqués, his hometown. He did visit the United States for a while. In his memoirs, he wrote, "To live, to liquidate half of life in order to live the other half, enriched by experience, freed from the chains of the past. For this, it was necessary for me to kill my past without pity or scruple. I had to rid myself of my own skin, that initial skin of my formless and revolutionary life during the post-war epoch." So he was also very much in tune with what was going on in the world at the time, depicting not only things that were near and dear to his heart, meaning his homeland, Spain, but he also painted things that could reflect other things that were going on in the world at the time. He came to the United States in 1940, and his art became a reflection of the fears that the war in Europe would escalate into a catastrophic global conflict that could lead to the collapse of Western civilization. Fortunately, that wasn't what happened. So let's look at some of his paintings. I'm sure that you are all familiar with the melting clocks, but I don't have that one here to show you. The first one is called The Invention of the Monsters. It was painted in 1937, right in the throes of the Spanish Civil War. It is his vision of a world turned inside out. You can see here, it's very ominous looking with clouds in the background, animals back here. This is a picture of, right here, is his own rendition of him and his wife Gala, whom he loved beyond measure. Let's see, what else can I tell you about this? There's fire in the distance, and there's a giraffe on fire, which is a recurring theme in some of his paintings. I think that's all I can tell you about this one. But again, this is a style that your students might enjoy because it is so different and there's no right or wrong. The next picture is called simply Spain. He was making a statement about the Spanish Civil War, which was fought for 3 years and was very bloody. It killed brothers against, it pitted brothers against brothers, cousins against cousins. I lost an uncle in the Spanish Civil War. We don't know where he's buried. And I'm not even sure what side he fought for, but I'm guessing he was against Franco. We think he's somewhere near Tarragona, which is in eastern Spain, but we're not sure. At any rate, that's just a personal note on my part. He was my father's next oldest brother. In this picture, you can see that it's earth toned. It's not quite as ominous, although there are some dark clouds up here. Not quite as ominous. There is a chest of drawers, another recurring image in many of Dali's paintings, especially of this time frame. There's an arm, and this is a woman leaning against the chest of drawers. The red cloth here represents Spain. There is a lion here that critics think probably represents the atrocities of war and the ferocity of war. There are warriors back here representing, of course, war. And this body, which I referred to before, is the in his mind, it was an aura of that was consistent with the melancholic message that he was trying to convey. It's kind of ghost-like and ephemeral. He never took sides in the Spanish Civil War, but he did exile himself to different parts of Europe and the United States during this time. And then we come to the Burning Giraffe, which is one of his most famous paintings. You can see the burning giraffe back here in the background. And then these are, this is very much a surrealist painting. It was done just before he came to the United States. It was painted in 1937, again, right in the throes of the Spanish Civil War. It was a bloody interlude. It was just before the Second World War started. Again, we have these figures. This one has open drawers, as we saw in the previous painting, another recurring theme. They represent things that are unfinished. This figure has three, I'm going to call them sticks, for lack of a better word, held up by crutches. And they are also recurring symbols in his paintings. They are holding up the woman. You can see another big drawer here that he is letting go, and she seems to be pushing away from the disaster that war is. In this one, you can see again those protruding sticks. She's holding up a red cloth. And these sticks are also held up by crutch-like objects. These hands, these arms are stripped down to just the muscle. Again, uncovering the atrocities of war. An interesting piece. It's not quite as somber in its coloring, but it is somber in its material, in what is being depicted, or at least in his mind. The next one is called Soft Construction and Boiled Beans. This is a funny title, I think. It's a premonition of civil war. He created the piece to represent the horrors of the Spanish Civil War. It was painted 6 months before the conflict began, so it was painted in early 1936. It depicts a monstrous and gruesome creature devouring itself, a self-destructive being like the war itself. Grotesque limbs grab at each other here, squeezing and stamping its head thrown back in agony and ecstasy. The painting is grisly and bizarre, but it reminds the viewer of the very real and grave ideas behind it. He gave the piece a backdrop of the beautiful northern Spanish sky, which contrasts with the beauty of the tradition and the terror of revolution. He includes a chest of drawers, there it is, again, in a central grounded position, and it appears to be holding the creature up. The chest of drawers is often used in his works as an allegory for things that are private or secret, perhaps here representing the rationale for the Spanish Civil War being kept unknown or secret. There are boiled beans scattered throughout the painting and thought to symbolize the necessity for the basics of sustenance, even in the face of war, shelter and food. There were many hardships that the Spanish people had to deal with during the Spanish Civil War. There were people who had to leave the country for political reasons. There were people who left the country in order to survive because food was scarce, because there were bombs being dropped for any number of reasons. I have family who left Spain and went to France during the Spanish Civil War, and then came back to Spain, and then eventually the United States. But it was a very tough time during the war. I have letters from that uncle who died, put away, just to have something to remember him by, as I never met him, of course, but he was a central part in my family's, my father's family, and told of the atrocities that he was seeing, and also expressed the hope that he would live to see them again. So that's just a little aside from my family heritage here. The next painter we're going to talk about is Fernando Botero. Fernando Botero does satirical paintings, political, military, religious figures, musicians, and royalty. They're all, he is known for his rotund figures, which do take on a human-like character in his painting. They are humorous at first glance, but they are also social commentary on what's going on politically. He was born in Medellin, Colombia, but moved to Bogota in 1951. He had his first international show at the Leo Matiz Gallery. Then he left Colombia and went to Madrid, where he studied in 1952, where he studied at the San Fernando Academy from 53 to 55. He returned to Colombia and exhibited his artwork at the Biblioteca Nacional in Bogota. He also spent time in Mexico studying the political murals of Rivera and Orozco. And though that study is prevalent in his paintings of to express his political perspective. He visited the United States in 1950, and I'm telling you a little bit more about Botero because he is not as well known or as well studied as Picasso and Dali, perhaps. And his style is completely different from theirs. He visited the United States in 1950. He worked in New York for 10 years, beginning in 1960. And he, abstract expressionism interested him, but he was very much in tune to the Italian Renaissance. So he began to experiment, creating volume in his paintings by expanding the figures and compressing the space around them. He was widely exhibited in Europe and North and South America, and received numerous awards. Since 1970, he has divided his time between Paris, Madrid, and Medellin. In 1999, Botero began to focus on political themes and depict violence in his paintings, seeing a moral necessity to depict the madness of war and violence. The first painting is, well, he did several. He did a painting called Massacre of Colombia in 1999, which represents a historical, he interprets a historical event and talks about the pain and horror of violent death. He also did one called The Earthquake, which is really not having to do with an earthquake, a seismic experience, but rather the crumbling of colonial architecture into rubble by a world that is thrown in off balance and ravaged by the unexpected. In his painting, The Dead Bishops, it was painted during the 1960s. The priests are also a recurring theme in his painting. Here, the priests appear to be dozing, their hands folded as if in prayer or blessing. And this is a painting that comes directly from his experience with the Italian Renaissance paintings, the religious Renaissance paintings. It's also reminiscent of his Catholic and conservative Antiochian society in which he grew up, and the power exercised by the church in every facet of life. There is no apparent vestige of violence in this picture. They all seem very calm and very placid. They come across with their folded hands, their peace blessings, and there's a little bit of a poetic justice imbued in his painting. But it is also talking about the power that the church has, or had at least. The next one is called Dancing in Colombia. And here we see the rotund figures. The musicians are in the background, but they are much larger in size than the couple who's dancing. This is supposedly a depiction of a couple dancing in a cafe. You can see cigarette butts strewn around the floor. The room seems overcrowded because of the compression of the background, or the compression of the scene with big characters. There is the sensation that the night has been long, and you can almost feel the smell of sweat, tobacco, liquor, and cheap cologne that fill the space. Interesting. The next two are called The Death of Pablo Escobar and Pablo Escobar Dead. Now, obviously, they're painted at different times. Pablo Escobar is represented slightly differently in each one. In the first one, this one, he is seen as the notorious drug lord being shot, and all these little dots here represent the bullets that were fired upon him and eventually killed him. The background is supposed to be the city of Antioquia, and he wasn't trying to hold Escobar up in any way. These paintings were done more to represent the recent political, at that time, the political violence that was going on in his country due to the drug cartels. This one was painted first, and then this one in 2006. He painted this one in 2006, and here we see, here he's being shot, here he is dead on top of a roof, and there's a police officer and a woman pointing up to him. The two paintings go hand in hand in that this one he's being chased and riddled with bullets. This one he's already dead. He died. He was taken down. Escobar was taken down in 1993, but it was an important event in Colombian history, and Botero represented it in his style of bright colors, and although subdued, but they're bright colors, and realistic poses. The next one is called The Presidential Family, La Familia Presidencial, and it is, this is the president of the country. Here you see he is surrounded by the military and by the church. You can see this is his wife, his mother or mother-in-law, and his daughter. You can see they're all rotund. Oh, a fat cap down here too. The woman is wearing an animal fur with the head still on it. The child is sitting on the grandmother's lap. But you can see that this represents what was going on politically, where the president was always surrounded by military and the church. This is a style, Botero style is definitely a style that can interest students because it's very simplistic. Not really, but it appears simplistic, and they might enjoy painting something or creating something in Botero style. It is said that this painting represents his contempt of corruption and avarice. All the family is adorned. They have earrings. They have, I'm not sure what he's carrying here, but they are well fed. They are well cared for. And that was true of the elite, while it wasn't true of the lower classes. Also, it is thought by the critics that this animal skin that is draped over his wife's arm is because he had an aversion to using animals as furs. He was opposed to animal abuse of any sort. And let's see. That's about all I can tell you about this painting. But if you look at the construction of it, it's fairly easy for students to recreate something in this style. This is earthquake. And as I said, it doesn't represent an earthquake like a seismic event. It is more in his mind. It was an expression of what was happening in his country. The devastation of the colonial buildings and things like that were happening around his time, the destruction of history, in a sense. Again, you can see the bright colors, and you can almost feel the building shake and tumble and create all this rubble that you see at the bottom. Another painting that could be used as a jump off point for students to draw something that they have imagined, have felt, have seen, have experienced as a collapse of something else, representing a collapse of something else. And now we'll move on to Frida Kahlo. Everyone knows Frida. She was quite an interesting person. She defied gender stereotypes, and she never, I've got to move this a little bit. She never altered her masculine features, in particular her unibrow, and her face is somewhat masculine looking as well. This is a family portrait, and here is Frida. She is dressed as a young man. Here she is again, dressed again as an older man. She smoked, she boxed, she won tequila challenges against men, and she liked to dress like a man, contrasting the fact that her mother and sisters were all dressed in dresses. She did, however, give a nod to her femininity by wearing flowers in her hair and colorful dresses. So she was a dichotomy of sorts. She refused to alter her masculine features, as I said. She included her monobrow and faint mustache and exaggerated these features in self-portraits. She was openly bisexual. She had multiple affairs with both men and women throughout her marriage to Diego Rivera. So he was not the only one to have extramarital affairs. And she didn't make any excuses for her choices, which was a very bold act at the time. She painted real women and real experiences. She deviated from the traditional depiction of female beauty in art and instead chose to paint raw and honest experiences that so many women face. Her subject matter included abortion, miscarriage, birth, and breastfeeding, among other things that were often seen as taboo in paintings at that time. She defied her destiny as a victim. She experienced an immense amount of suffering throughout her life, contracting polio at age 6, suffering from spina bifida, and then at 18, suffering a near fatal trolley accident that left her unable to bear children. While so many women were depicted as the victim, Frida demonstrated in her work that pain is an intrinsic part of life, but should not and did not define her. She embraced weirdness. I mean, how many of us would put a cat and a monkey on our shoulders? She loved breaking the rules, both in her art and in life. She surrounded herself with other inspiring creative thinkers. One of the reasons her work is so widely celebrated is because it was unlike anything else that preceded it. She was well aware of her uniqueness, and she encouraged others to embrace their inner weirdo too. So her style can be fun for the students, although probably not many high school students would want to tackle some of the topics that she did, but her style might lend itself to imitation. She was very fierce. She was just fierce. She didn't shy away from politics. She was inspired. She was a voracious reader, and as such, she became very much a proponent of indigenismo, indigenousness. It was an ideology which sought to rid the Mexican mindset of the superiority of Europe. She became a part of the Cachucas. It was an informal group which rebelled against everything conservative, played pranks, and discussed philosophy. She is a key Mexican feminist, which is reflected in the flood of women and men who continue to visit La Casa Azul, her cobalt blue-walled former home in the city's Coyoacán district. Here are the two Fridas. The one in the white dress is the, I'm going to back up. She did this painting shortly after her divorce from Diego Rivera. It shows the two different Fridas. One is the traditional Frida in the Tijuana costume with a broken heart, this one, and she's sitting next to the independent, modernly dressed Frida. In her diary, she wrote about this painting and said that it originated from her memory of an imaginary childhood friend. Later, she admitted it really expressed her desperation and loneliness that came from her separation from Diego. The two Fridas are holding hands. They have visible hearts, and the heart is a traditional part of, is part of the tradition of Frida painting herself as open, cut and torn open. The main artery, which comes from the torn heart down to the right hand of the traditional Frida, this one, is cut off by the surgical pincers held in her lap. The blood keeps dripping onto her white dress, and she's in danger of bleeding to death, and you can see spots of blood everywhere. The stormy sky is filled with agitated clouds that may reflect Frida's inner turmoil. Thinking about death, this was painted during the latter years of Frida's life. She was tortured by numerous illnesses and complications. She spent a great deal of time in bed, but she wanted to continue painting, and so she rigged this contraption that would allow her to paint while still laying flat on her back, and only using her hand to hold the toothbrush, the paintbrush. Because of her poor health condition, she knew that death was inevitable, and she thought about it a lot. Thus, the the skull and cross, the skull here depicted in her mind's eye. According to ancient Mexican culture, death also means rebirth and life. Kind of a Christian view too. In this portrait, she puts herself against the background of lavish green leaves, and which are a symbol of life. And it seems she gives the appearance that she understands that death is just a pathway to another form of life. But her paintings are very interesting, and since they depict real emotions, there are students who would enjoy using her style to do some painting. Diego Rivera is next, an obvious step. He was, of course, married to Frida. The major themes of his works were social inequality, the relationship of nature, industry, and technology, and the history and fate of Mexico. He was Mexican through and through. He was a lifelong Marxist. He belonged to the Mexican Communist Party and had ties to the Soviet Union. He is an example of socially committed artist. His art expressed his outspoken commitment to the left-wing political causes, depicting such subjects as the Mexican peasantry, American workers, and revolutionary figures like Emiliano Zapata and Lenin. In the first painting that I'm going to show you for his first work, it's called The Liberation of the Peon. It was done in 1931. You can see there are somewhat bright colors used, although in a subdued fashion. It is a depiction of a laborer who had been beaten and left to die. He's cut down from a post, which we can't see, but he was cut down from a post by sympathetic revolutionary soldiers who tended to his broken body. Peonage was a system of indentured servitude established by the Spanish colonists, under which natives were forced to work the land. It was part of Mexican life until the 1920s, or until the 20th century. This mural offers the injustice of earlier social and economic conditions as a rationale for the Mexican Revolution. And you can see the facial expressions and the care with which these men are taking him down, cutting him down from the post and taking care of his body. Very detailed work. This one is called Sugarcane. It was also painted in 1931. It's set on a sugar plantation. It is a portable mural, and it introduces the tensions of labor, race, and economic inequality that simmered in Mexico even after the Mexican Revolution. In the foreground, you can see an Indian woman with the traditional braids here and white clothes, and that's what peasants wore, white. She's cutting papaya from a tree, and her children are collecting the papayas. These are her children. Then in the middle ground, or in the background, let's start with the background, the men are cutting down the sugar cane, again, dressed in white as the peasants are, or were. The foreman has a definite lighter skin, and he's watching over them on horseback. The foreman, in the background here, there is a wealthy landowner, again with pale skin. He's languishing in a hammock. And what Rivera wanted to express in this mural was the dichotomy, the difference between the class struggles, the struggle between classes. He wanted there to be an understanding of history that was born in industrialized Europe to the context of Mexico, which was primarily an agrarian country until after World War II. Again, very detailed you can see dogs lying under the hammock, and you can almost feel the motion of the machetes as they cut through the sugar cane, and then the bowed bodies of the men carrying the sugar cane off to be made into other products. It's very interesting painting. The Uprising, again, is painted in 1931. He was very prolific. I'm going to move this over here. Was very prolific in 1931. This painting is full of military in the back. Well, military here, and then the lower class here, the peasants. It depicts a woman with a baby on her hip, and a working man as they fend off an attack by a uniformed soldier. There's a riotous crowd back here clashing with the soldiers, who force the demonstrators to the ground, as here. Location is unclear, but the color of the skin tones imply that it was in Mexico or another Latin American country. In the early 30s, there was an era of widespread labor unrest. Images of violent repression of strikes would have been depicted by artists both in the United States and Latin America. Again, you see the subdued colors, but bright colors, as opposed to Guernica and the Charnel house. A lot of detail in the facial expressions. You can almost hear this child crying, and you can almost feel that blade just ready to plunge into someone's body. Emiliano Zapata was a champion of agrarian reform and a key protagonist in the Mexican Revolution. Here he's leading a band of peasant rebels armed with whatever weapons they could get. Machetes, hoes, sticks, whatever they could get. He's holding the bridle of a majestic white horse, and he stands triumphantly beside the dead body of an hacienda owner. Though Mexican and US newspapers regularly vilified the revolutionary leader as a treacherous bandit, Rivera immortalized Zapata as a hero and glorified the victory of the revolution in this image. And you can see the faces here, and the horse is beautifully drawn, so majestic, with his head held high, and very clearly you can see the farm utensils that are being used as weapons. Then we go to Frozen Assets, painted between 1931 and 1932, and it depicts the New York skyline, and it's done in three parts. The top, and it's supposed to show the inequities of the economy. The upper part here shows a large group of recognizable skyscrapers. The middle section here is a steel and glass shed that serves as a shelter for rows of sleeping men, pointing to the dispossessed labor that made such extraordinary growth possible during a period of economic turmoil. So these men here, lying in their cots, were the builders of the skyscrapers, but they're relegated to a shed, as he calls it. And then in the bottom portion of the painting, it represents a bank where there is a waiting room, and there are 3 people waiting. There is a gentleman seated at the desk here, and a guard. These people are waiting to go into the vault, and that was the whole point of this, was that the masses trudge to work, the homeless are warehoused, and the wealthy squirrel away their money. So the inequity of the economy and of people. And with that, we go to more modern works. The first is In Search of a New Home, Eric Almanza, and clearly depicts a family trying to cross the border from Mexico and trying to scale the wall with a helicopter in the background and an eagle flying overhead. The dangers of crossing the board, the difficulty of crossing the border and getting caught. But this is very now, very current. Something that some of your students might identify with, some may not, but if they read the news or watch the news, surely they know what's going on at the southern border. This one is another very current theme, the Sunshine. It's titled The Sunshine State, but it is an homage to Black Lives Matter, 2 deaths that took place here in Florida. And it was done by Justine Fisher. Again, very current, something that students can certainly identify with. You see guns in these hands, but then these bodies are hanging. And we all know about Trayvon Martin, so not too far down the road from me. As a matter of fact, Sanford is about an hour and a half from where I live. Something very current. And that might be where your students are headed, but they might use the style of Picasso or Dali or Botero or Kahlo or Rivera to illustrate something, a current event or a current happening in their state, in their community, in the world. Street art and graffiti has been around for a while. It is an expression of art that I've read came about because it didn't cost anything or very little. As long as you had paint and a paintbrush or a spray can, you can do street art. As long as, you know, the buildings are there. The buildings are there to be used as long as you're given permission to do so. One of the most famous streets for street art is, before I go there, there are many topics that are handled through street art. Here's one that highlights homelessness and the housing crisis. There aren't enough homes for people to own. They're very often displaced and wind up sleeping on the streets or in shelters. This was done, you can see on the wall of a building. And you can feel the angst of this man who's poorly dressed and sleeping on the streets. Domestic violence and women discrimination has also been handled as street art. The inequality, the glass ceiling, the hopelessness of women in situations of domestic violence. What I have found I'm retired now, but I had a lot of students who were very artistic, and so they enjoyed drawing things. And a lot of times, if you looked at their drawings, you could see things about them that they wouldn't tell you necessarily, but that you could feel through their art. And very often, the ones who were artistically driven would do many sketches of things, little doodles in their book, not in their notebook, and sometimes share with me and with the rest of the class. Some of them who were creative in other ways would write poems or little short essays about things that were interesting to them or that were occurring in their lives without being forthright. They were always cloaked in third person, but you got the feeling that there were things going on in their lives that either personally touched them at home or that touched them in a more general global way. But if you give children, regardless of their age, if you give children free rein to express their creativity, you never know where that will lead. And sometimes it's a very big outlet, which is why I wanted to choose this topic to present, because I think it's so important. Not only does it tie us to the rest of the world, but it also gives students an outlet and gives us an outlet as well. I'm not much of a drawer. I do like to write occasionally, but I don't paint. I'm not artistic in that sense at all. But when I look at art, I see, or I try to put myself in the place of the artist and see what he or she was seeing. I mean, this is very clearly a case of domestic violence. The man standing in the doorway, and the woman holding her head, and the little boy trying to comfort her, and the discrimination that women have felt through the years, unequal pay, of going up against the glass ceiling, and all of those kinds of things. This is a very good representation of that. Again, done on the wall of the building. Race and identity, and how to fight xenophobia and everything else that there is in the world these days. This solidarity painting reminds me a lot of Picasso. It looks like eyes, and I don't know the background of this painting, but it reminds me of eyes, like the world is watching. And the Black Lives Matter poster here drawn on this wall. Again, more eyes, and it seems like an endless hall that someone is trying to cross and get to the other side. Climate change and environmental causes are also depicted in street art very often. This one you can see is all in English, but there are, there is a surge right now going on in Spain of a lot of street art. The famous Osborne bull that you see in the countryside in Spain has been used to depict equal rights, human rights. They've gone around painting the bull in different colors. The gay pride flag has been painted on the bull. If it's a political cause, they've done that. There's all kinds of things going on in Spain now that 70 years ago, 80 years ago would not have, 90 years ago now, I guess, would never have happened. Or, well, not even, because Franco died in 1975. So that's only about 50 years ago. And before his death, you would never, ever have seen anything like that. You would never see newspapers plastered on the walls or painting graffiti or anything like that, but you see it now. Advocating for independence, in this case, Puerto Rico, Liberación Ya, painted on a wall. That's a very strong political statement. And then we get to Pilsen Street in Chicago. I don't know if any of you went to the AATSP conference in Chicago back in 2016, I think it was. I had the privilege of going, and I visited Pilsen Street. I was amazed by the street art. It was absolutely fabulous. It's known for its public art. There are many, many, many murals along 16th Street and beyond. They distinguish the neighborhood as a center not only of Mexican culture, but also of creativity and self-expression. And let's see, I think, yes, here are some examples of some of the street art along Pilsen Street. It's very colorful, and it's very unique in many senses, but it's certainly an example of what a student can do to illustrate something that he or she is concerned about or has a passion for. I have a friend in Spain who was a teacher here in the United States, but she moved to Spain about 3 years ago and has been teaching English there. She did a project with her high school students on street art, and her students had to produce some street art, not literally on the street, but a poster representing something that they felt strongly about. Please don't forget to send me a piece of art or literature, if you're so inclined, that reflects social injustice today in the style of one of the artists or writers. I did not include the writers in this presentation. Please send them to me, and please get permission from the student to allow me to use them in presentations or on my webpage. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I have enjoyed presenting it to you and hope that I've given you an idea of how you can use art to engage students, to make them feel like their views and opinions are important, but given through art or literature, and give them a choice of what artist they use. It's up to them. That everyone identifies with a different kind of art, and that's important, or a different kind of literature, or style of literature. I have given you a project-based learning activity in the handout that you can use to incorporate this. And like I said, I know it's the end of the school year, but I know from my experience at the end of the school year, when I have some groups of students, or had students taking AP tests or the Cambridge A-levels, and I'd have some students who were doing one or the other, and I had half a class. That was a great time to do something like this, because every day was a different group of kids, and in theory, at least, you had covered all the material. So this was kind of an added bonus. And as part of a PBL, of course, there has to be certain things covered. There have to be benchmarks covered and standards, and there has to be speaking involved, and there has to be listening involved, and all that. So it's a great summative assessment at the end of the year that's kind of fun for the kids, and that is not put into a box. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Let's keep in touch, please. Thank you for coming to the webinar. I hope you've enjoyed it. I wish I could have done this in person, or at least live. And I hope to present this at a conference coming up sometime soon, in which there will be it'll be a workshop type thing where you will actually be producing some of the pieces yourself, so that you can show your students what you've done and how you did it and why you did it. So again, thank you so much for attending. I hope you've learned something. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed presenting it to you. I look forward to seeing you in person one of these days. Ciao, ciao.